Oh, who is responsible for waste? That's a really good question. I would say we all are.
First and foremost, it's the consumer, because we individually make choices, but those are hard choices. And sometimes those choices are made harder by actions of businesses and profit.
Who is responsible for waste?
Oh, it's the industry. Industry number one, and the consumer number two. But it's the industry.
Who is responsible for waste?
Yeah, I mean, government, I think, also plays a big role in it. Making sure we have regulations that are looking out for citizens, for people.
Who is responsible for waste?
The easiest answer is everybody's responsible for waste. Okay, so whether it's myself, or whether it's the Bottle Depot business, whether it's the diverters, everybody's responsible. So what are we each doing, or how are we each taking our part to reduce that? It's everybody's responsibility when it's said and done.
But I also don't think that we should just look at the individual, because, you know, my one action isn't actually going to make a huge difference unless we hold those in charge accountable for their actions, for what they make us waste. Consumer responsibility is one thing, but corporate responsibility is another, and I think we need to hold our governments accountable for enforcing that.
There's maybe some players that are more responsible than others, and I don't think it's helpful to sort of put all this pressure on the individual. So I think, you know, doing your part in the day-to-day, what you can to help, is really important, but also holding business or other sort of institutions like that accountable for the waste that they're creating. And I think that's a big part of circular economy, is, you know, having government sort of play a leading role in that.
There are many people that are responsible for that hold some responsibility. And I do believe that it's important for businesses to take more responsibility, and I believe many of them are. But that comes down to me as a consumer, and all consumers coming down on those businesses to make them recognize that the smart choice is to really try to reduce waste to the greatest degree possible. Will there ever be no waste? It's going to be pretty tough to have no waste, but I think that we're all responsible.
Everyone is responsible for creating waste. Everyone is also responsible for response to waste, right? I mean, you shouldn't assume that if you create waste, somebody else is going to fix it. But at the same time, you know, there are types of waste that it's unrealistic to expect an individual who creates it to actually be able to directly respond to it. So there is, I think, a reasonable expectation that some agency, some public service takes a role in that. Then you get into the conversation about how and when and to what extent, and what that looks like in different municipalities, in different regions, in different provinces. And so that's, I think, where it becomes a bit murky. And then, of course, the different orders of government make it not at all easy. So is it a municipal government entirely? So far it's been mostly, but then there's also regional governments, provincial governments, so it is not an easy answer. Yeah, I think the answer to the first part, who's responsible for creating it, is all of us. Who's responsible for the response to that is all of us, but maybe in different envelopes.
I think everyone is responsible for waste. It's very common to see fingers pointed. It should be on this industry, or it should be on consumers, or it should be on government. And I think that the answer lies in the middle, in that it's everyone's responsibility, because we all have different levers of power. Consumers drive the economy. Like, we make decisions every single day and kind of vote with our dollars for different products and different ways with our general habits. And then different levels of governments can create different policies and bylaws and regulations. And I think it's also key for all the different levels to work together. And then from a business perspective, businesses are super creative, and they can cater to their customers in different ways, and they have a lot of different interesting tools at their fingertips to try to reduce waste. So yeah, everyone's responsibility.
Who's responsible for waste? I think when we look at the lens of extended producer responsibility, I think the creators of those products, those things that become waste, are responsible for the life cycle of those products. I do think consumers have a role to play in that, as the people who are purchasing those items, but it's only through those systems, which should be in place at that larger level. I think the government plays a role in making that happen. But at the end of the day, it should be the people that are making those things that have some responsibility for supporting what happens to those things after they've created them.
I totally think it's the industry, because they produce, they make the money, it's their responsibility. The refund system is based on EPR, extended producer's responsibility. Well, that's great, you know? It's a minimum. It's not even enough, but it's a good start. It starts with the people who have created the need for the consumption of whatever. They should be paying for this trash problem that we have in the world.
So EPR is extended producer responsibility. So it's targeted at recycling, and it basically means that the producer or the manufacturer, whoever's producing that product or that material, is paying for its end of life. When I started in the waste world, I was like, most people don't know what extended producer responsibility is. It's a complex, like, I'm still learning about it. Some people don't even know that certain things are under extended producer responsibility, and that maybe you don't need to pay to try to recycle this item. There's this broad stat that it's only this 9% gets recycled across Canada, but it's actually quite a bit more in BC. BC has a really good extended producer responsibility system that is continuously expanding. I think mattresses were just added to it. So I think it is really impactful to have a robust deposit system or extended producer responsibility.
Who is responsible for waste? Well, I think we have a shared responsibility. On one hand, it's the producer who is putting out unnecessary waste often. So I think that's a key responsibility. And on the other hand, it's of course also the responsibility of governments, because they are putting out legislation and policies which could either increase or decrease the generation of waste. And of course also the consumer has a certain responsibility. Particularly a responsibility in diverting materials if there is recycling opportunities. So the consumer has the responsibility to divert it into the right stream so that it gets recycled. But the primary responsibility, I think, is the producer, because that's where it's coming from. And often the consumer has no real choice. It comes packaged already and there are no other choices. So I think major responsibility is on the producer. Second responsibility is on government, because they are legislating it. They could bring up policies to reduce or to change the design and the materials. And the third responsibility, of course, is also the consumer.
What makes me hopeful, I think, is the community. It's the fact that people show up and they keep showing up, and they show up not just for themselves, but for each other. And that hasn't slowed down for us. Even something like the pandemic saw a shift in how we were able to engage. But as soon as we were able to come back together, we saw that happen so quickly and in such a great way to be able to say, this is what people want. And for us to be able to help support that kind of community, to see the enthusiasm of new members coming in and their engagement with that work and that interest in that purpose is something that keeps me hopeful.
From a hopeful standpoint, I think the community's engaged, okay, and I think that's the most hopeful thing, right? Everybody's talking about it. People want to see the deposit rate go up, and certainly the recovery rate go up as well. So I think the fact that there's conversations like this out here, people see the potential, see what the diverters are doing. I think that's what makes me most hopeful. I think when it's all said and done, I'm excited there's more awareness being rolled out. That's really what I'm excited about. The opportunity to say, look, here's a way we can solve a problem. Okay, if you put that deposit rate up, we're going to solve this problem, right? It might not be 25 cents, maybe it has to be 35. Okay, but not only are we going to help the landfill situation and the recovery rate, but we're going to help people in need who this is their source of income, okay, and this is their only means, right? And it becomes a big win for everybody.
Right now, what makes me really hopeful, or something that's just sort of come up recently, is hearing about Yuta's work in Brazil and like the university she's been creating there, like by and for waste pickers. Obviously, different contexts, different situations, but the work being done down there is so awesome. It can only go up from there, and I think if we can sort of learn from it in this context, that's great, and form those connections between the North and the South, and yeah, I think that's really inspiring.
A current project, the Mapping Waste Governance, involves colleagues and students and waste pickers in Kenya, Tanzania, Nicaragua, Argentina, and Brazil, where we do individual research in each country and then share the knowledge we're generating with these partners. In the community-based research lab, we have many students, masters, PhD students, but also honor students and volunteers, undergraduate students, and many of them are focusing on waste issues. So, for example, one student, she will be using VR, virtual reality, to bring the work of waste pickers closer to decision makers and also to the general public. Another student is looking at the diversion of food waste into food banks for food insecure population in the city. And maybe the diverters could play a role in collecting and diverting that food into those outlets. Another student of mine, she's looking at the Arctic and plastic pollution and involving youth in addressing that issue. Wuni, he is from Ghana, and he's looking at food waste in universities. He's comparing UVic and the food waste here and with the food waste generated in Kisumu in Kenya. The most recent initiative is called the Unikata, which is a university for and with waste pickers. So we have done research to find out the perspectives, the demand, the needs of waste pickers in terms of setting up a permanent learning environment for them. I see the Unikata project as a real possibility where this exchange can happen, where we can learn from both sides. Both sides can inspire themselves and can provide solutions and strategies which have worked in one context, and maybe adapting them to a different context could also benefit binners and diverters here, for example.
We always have sort of lofty goals for the future. We like to envision something that isn't happening and see how we can do that. I would love to see the Diverters program grow and grow. I just think it's such a positive role model for people, because a lot of times when people graduate from something like this, their recovery community, they're sober, they're housed, they've reconnected with their family, if that's a positive thing for them. But a lot of times a traditional job doesn't work for them. And so you're always kind of looking for things that are alternative, something that somebody could maybe do brilliantly for 20 hours a week, but might fail if it was 30. So you're always looking for alternatives. And I always see something like the Diverters program to see it grow to the point where people who don't fit into a, say, traditional job would have an opportunity to then join a group such as the Diverters and carry on their recovery.
I personally am always in awe of the commitment, hard work, ingenuity, and determination of diverters in Victoria. And I think that more people that are part of our city and our communities are making connections with diverters, waste picker, binners, acknowledging the work that they do, appreciating the work that they do, supporting, donating, providing funds so that more programs can come to life. I get so excited and I'm so amazed by the work that's being done. I'm just really hoping that, more of our community gets involved and more voices are heard and more people are seen for the great work that they're doing.
What makes me excited about this kind of work is that it's tangible. We see solutions. We can come up with them from the ground up. And what makes me excited about working with the Diverters is they are like the literal reincarnation of that solution on the ground. And I think that it's a deeply local thing as well as a deeply personal thing. You know, when we look at the big picture, it's so big and so scary. But when we look at, you know, the small changes we can make and the impact that that can have, that makes me optimistic. That makes this work worth doing.
So we have seen that waste is very complex and it's a huge, wicked problem. There is many things we can do. I think the first thing we as consumers, we need to think about, do I really need to buy this? Do I really need to have that item? Or can I reuse? Or can I maybe repair? Or can I buy something used already? So I think that's the best strategy. If at the beginning you ask yourself, do I really need it? Or do I have sufficient? I think that makes a great contribution to the environment. Waste is also so complex because it comes in so many different materials. They are not all recyclables. It's not only a nuisance if they go to the landfill, but it's even a greater nuisance if they get littered in the environment. Once they are in the environment, be it the land or be it the soil, be it the water, the plastics degrade into smaller pieces, microplastics, and then even smaller pieces, nanoplastics. And right now, research has discovered that these smaller pieces, the nanoplastics, are actually getting into the food chain, which basically means that they end up in our food and that they end up in our bloodstream as well. I think that should make us really conscious about what we're consuming, where we're putting the materials, and where we put our pressure in terms of addressing government and the producers in really changing what they are using as packaging. Because most of the plastic which enters the environment comes through packaging. And packaging is everywhere. It's not just in the grocery store, but it also comes in the building materials. Everything is plastic packaged. You order something online, it comes heavily plastic packaged as well. And in so many cases, it's totally unnecessary.
This is crazy, you know, I mean, garbage should be the exception. It's the rule. It's crazy, it's just waste. It's pure waste. How come we're still there? And sometimes, like, it scares me because we need diversity and we need grassroots organization involved.
I would love to tell everybody to get involved, connect with your community. Looking at sustainability, I think that it's super important to look at your local community and look at what's happening and to get involved in whatever way you can.
Some people feel powerless with really complex environmental problems. You know, when we look at climate change, people are just like, this is just a mountain. What am I going to do as one person or one business to make an impact? And I try to be as positive as possible because with the amount of information that we're receiving constantly, it's easy to shut off from it. Well, I can't make an impact. This is just too much. I'm just a drop in the bucket. But if you imagine yourself, it's not like the volume of that drop in the bucket, but it's the ripples that you create. So you don't need to stand on a platform and say, everyone bring a reusable little produce bag to the grocery store. Maybe people won't even listen, but if you yourself do that, people are going to see. And I think social norms are really powerful. One of my favorite examples that I've recognized recently is, especially here in Victoria, everyone always thanks the bus driver when you're getting off the bus. And some people don't. So when I'm taking the bus, there will be like a lineup of people getting off the bus. And you know, the first person says thank you, the second person says thank you, the third person, and then the fourth person, maybe they wouldn't have said thank you if they're the first person off the bus, but because everyone else before them has said thank you, they have that social pressure and there's that social norm now to say thank you. And I think that that's a really powerful message. Like if we think of that in terms of our habits of reducing waste and bringing a reusable mug or, you know, bringing your reusable bag, simple things like that, I think that it's really powerful.
One question I get a lot is, what can I do to help? I always like to say, it doesn't hurt to be kind. And it doesn't hurt to, if you see someone on the sidewalk when you're heading to work, it doesn't hurt just to say hi, you know, or good morning. It's something that we did a lot, I think, in early society that we've kind of forgotten now. We're all so private and tight. But I make it a point every morning just to say hi to the people who are there. It doesn't matter if they're smoking on a crack pipe or just shivering in the cold. I just say, hi, how are you today? And it just is a little thing that lets people be seen. And I think that's vitally important. I think we can't have to look at people as not being disposable, but as being fellow human beings. And just saying hello to someone can maybe make their day.
I would say first and foremost, reach out and support people in your community and go and talk with people. Just have a conversation and it can make all the difference for you, let alone that other person. When we see someone binning and certain thoughts come into our head about them, instead of going with that thought, take a few moments to go up and talk to the person, because it will make all of the world of a difference for that person to be seen and recognized and valued. And you'll get a huge hit of goodness from it too.
Including diverters into these conversations is super key. They're experts in their own right. They're doing this every day. Like they know what it's like. They have ideas. Bringing them to the table is super, super key, especially in breaking down the stigma too, because that is such a huge barrier. Being like socially isolated and just, not having a voice in the same way that a lot of us do, despite doing such an incredible job and, sort of like the unsung heroes of waste reduction in our communities.
There's not a single person I've talked to on the street that hasn't suffered abuse and trauma from a very early age, whether that's prenatal trauma, whether that is sexual, physical, mental, verbal abuse when they were young children. No one has escaped that. This is through a lot of different circumstances. And sadly, a lot of us are not that far away from needing the help of a place like our place.
There are many people that have, through no fault of their own, had a brain injury, have had other events that have created trauma earlier in life, let alone later, that are extraordinary individuals that just literally carry more weight than many of us that have not had experienced that. And that many of the people in the sort of the downtown community, they have shown more courage in just the last year or two than most of us have in our entire lifetimes. And it changes the way you look at everybody.
Our environment is at risk, our livelihoods are at risk, our future is at risk. So, changing our perceptions and reducing that stigma, I think, is really important. And I think that that's a message that we all need to carry forward with us.